right, is there any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then Detective Crowfoot may remain. Proceed.
And then to give the court an outline of what to expect, I have 4 witnesses to be concluded with Taylor Smith from EPSO jail to address the prelim on the second charge. So my game plan was to do both prelims essentially at the exact same time.
All right, is that all right, Mr. Rogers?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's proceed.
People call UCCS Officer Derek DeMello to the stand.
Is this in here?
It is.
Sir, if you'd step up here in front of the witness stand for me, please. I will administer the oath to you. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear in penalty of perjury that the evidence you shall give in the case now in hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat. All right, Mr. Fuller.
Could you say name, sir, and spell your last?
Derek Allen DeMello, last name is spelled D-apostrophe M-E-L-L-O-W.
What do you do?
I currently am a police officer with the University of Colorado Springs,
How long have you been a police officer for UCCS?
approximately 3 years.
Any law enforcement experience prior?
Yes, I was a deputy sheriff with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office for approximately 23 years.
Any other experience to note?
No.
I want to draw your attention to February 16th, 2024. Were you on duty that day?
Yes.
Do you remember getting a call for service for shots fired that day?
Yes.
Do you remember when the call for service came in?
Approximately 05:59.
So in civilian terms, 5:59 a.m.
Correct.
Where was this call? Where did it come in?
We were in our headquarters. The call came in for shots fired at 4645 Clyde Way, which is Crestone House on our campus, room 108.
And if you look in front of you, you'll see what's been marked for identification as People's Exhibit 1. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is it?
That is Crestone House, 4546 Clyde Way.
And there's sort of 2 pictures depicted in that. Are they both, one's an overhead map and one's more of a zoomed in with a box pointing to where the call for service came in?
Yes, it looks accurate.
A fair and accurate representation of what you just described?
Yes.
You know, the people who moved from it because these People's Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objection?
Not for purposes of this hearing, Your Honor.
One is admitted, and officer, you're saying Crestone.
Crestone House.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Go ahead.
Spelled C-R-E-S-T-O-N-E, correct?
Correct.
Where specifically in Crestone House did the call for service originate?
It's room 108 or pod 108.
Can you give me a general description of what is a pod at UCCS when you say pod?
There's different pods for different houses. However, this pod was basically a suite that consisted of 4 separate rooms and a common area.
Great. The nature of the call you said was shots fired. Do you have any other general information about what this call for service was going to be?
No, it came in as 1 shot fired.
1 shot fired?
Correct.
Were you able to determine who the reporting party was?
It was subsequently identified as Giancarlo Agudelo.
I'm going to spell that for the court reporter's benefit.
Apologize.
Giancarlo. Last name is Agudelo. Was this person purportedly calling from inside the pod?
Yes.
Did you know which room he was inside the pod?
I believe it was Unit B.
So when you arrived onto the scene, do you remember what your arrival time was?
Approximately 6:05 we arrived on scene.
So fairly quickly, would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Was it just you that responded, or was there more than one UCCS officer?
Myself, Officer Perry, and Corporal Matthew Brown.
When you arrived to Pod 108, did you knock on the door?
Corporal Brown knocked on the door on arrival, received no answer at that point.
What did you do next?
I knocked on the door as well. Upon receiving no answer, I walked towards the main entrance, the stairway where what we call a resident assistant student employee had a key to access the room.
Did they in fact have a key to access the room?
Yes.
Did you happen to see any witnesses in the hallway as you were trying to ascertain the key and get entry into pod 108?
Yes, a female, unidentified, leaned out of the door of 106, unit 106, and stated she heard a loud bang and a scream.
So now with the resident advisor, did you gain interest in the pod 108?
Yes, once I received the key, I proceeded back to room 108, and at that time, we opened the door, announced UCCS police, and entered the room.
Do you remember what time you entered the room at?
That was approximately 6:10.
After, you said a 6:05 arrival time?
Correct.
And so I believe you left off saying you announced yourself as UCCS police.
Correct.
Did you all enter the room, all three of you?
Yes.
How did that go? Who went where?
So Officer Perry was first in. I can't recall, me and Corporal Brown was very close, so I was probably second, and Corporal Brown was third.
And just so the judge can understand, rooms A and B would be to the left, and then C and D would be to the right as you enter the pod?
Correct.
And which way did you go?
Myself and Officer Perry proceeded to unit A and B, and Corporal Brown proceeded to unit C and D.
And did you have to open the door to unit A to see what was inside?
No, as we were proceeding down the shore hallway, we observed that the door to unit A was open.
And I'm going to draw your attention to what's in front of you as marked for notification as people's 2 through 4. So 2, 3, and 4. Do you recognize those, officer?
Yes.
What are they?
Those are pictures of the occupants of the room, subsequently identified as Celie Montgomery and Samuel Knopp. And that is what I observed when entering the room.
Picture number exhibit 2 being sort of the entire room, people's exhibit 3 being the first victim, and people's exhibit 4 being the second victim.
Yes.
That you were later able to identify as names.
Yes.
Fair and accurate representation of the 2 victims inside as it appeared generally when you entered the room.
Yes.
The people moved to admit exhibits 2, 3, and 4.
Any objection?
Not for the purposes of this hearing, Your Honor.
2, 3, and 4 are admitted.
What injuries, at least obviously, were you able to observe on the occupants of room A?
In my quick scan, I observed injuries to the abdomen of the male laying on the ground, and there was an injury to the female who was laying on the bed.
Do you remember where you saw the injury on the female?
Just the abdomen area. I was not scanning for that much detail at that point in time.
Did they appear deceased?
Yes.
Both of them?
Yes.
What was their skin color like that led you to that determination?
Definitely pale in color. Appeared that they were definitely deceased.
Did you check for vital signs nevertheless?
Officer Perry did, with negative results.
Did you observe any weapons on the scene?
No.
Did you search the room?
No. We did search the room for anybody hiding, but not for a specific search, no.
Now I want to turn to Unit B. Was Unit B occupied?
Yes.
Who was in Unit B or Room B?
That was the reporting party, Giancarlo Agudello.
Was anyone else in Room B with him?
No.
Did he have any obvious signs of injuries?
No.
Did you get a brief statement from him as to what had happened?
I obtained his driver's license or ID from him and escorted him to the main area of the building. And during my contact with him, he did state that he heard
Objection, hearsay?
This is a preliminary hearing.
Objections overruled.
he stated that he heard 9 shots.
Did other detectives, Were other detectives tasked with doing an in-depth interview with this witness?
I believe so.
And that wasn't you?
Correct.
What about units C and units D? Did you look in C and D?
Yes.
What happened when you tried to check for occupants in C and D?
Myself and another CSPD officer checked unit C and D. We opened them, they were locked. We had the key that opened the unit and the individual units. They appeared to be unoccupied.
But to be clear, both were locked.
Correct.
Were there any belongings, obvious, signs of people living in any one of these two rooms?
I don't recall seeing any belongings in either room.
Who then subsequently assumed control of this scene?
Officers from the Colorado Springs Police Department had responded and they assumed control of the scene.
Did you and UCCS make a determination whether there was any missing roommates from the pod 108?
I was subsequently provided information that one of the roommates was not accounted for. That roommate was Nicholas Jordan.
How long did you remain on scene for?
At approximately 11, 12 hours, I relieved the CSPD officer on the east side of the building for basically containment and scene control. And then I was subsequently relieved by Officer Rader of the UCCS Police Department approximately 10 hours.
Is it fair to say the remainder of this investigation and the responsibilities for it was passed off to the Colorado Springs Police Department?
Yes.
One moment, Your Honor, if I may. This dorm, is it located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, El Paso County?
Yes.
Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Now, this may seem like an obvious question since you were called after the fact, but you didn't witness any incident that took place in that building that day, correct?
Correct.
Your position there is reporting after the fact to see what that's happened at that location.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It took me a minute.
Yeah. So essentially, I guess what I'm getting at is that that evening you never saw Mr. Jordan, correct?
Correct.
And nobody that you spoke to personally saw Mr. Jordan, correct?
Correct.
You don't know what the interaction was located within Pod 108, correct? That led to the ultimate event.
Correct.
So essentially, you're not sure if there was like a self-defense situation going on.
That's correct.
You don't know if there was just a heated argument that went too far.
Yeah, no idea.
Okay. So it could be anything from just coming across something to a self-defense type of situation, right?
I would assume so, yeah.
Okay. You said that you did not search the room, correct?
We did a visual search for somebody that may have been hiding or anybody like a closet area like that, but no, not a specific search for anything.
Okay. So in this case, prior to your arriving, was there any mention of a firearm being collected or secured anywhere?
No.
No? Okay. And your response to this was after there had been a call for service regarding a shooting at this location, correct?
Say it again?
That your response to this came from a call for service for a shooting?
Yes.
So knowing that there was a shooting would imply that there was a gun involved?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because when you're coming across the potential shooting scene, when you come across the scene, is it not something that you pay attention for? Things like firearms, projectiles, shell cartridges, things of that nature?
It depends on the timing of during the response. Initial response is obviously scene safety and security. We don't know what the situation is. So at that point, if there there's no reason to disturb the scene at that point. They seemed to be obviously deceased, so there was no reason for us to search at that point. Additional resources would assume that responsibility.
So there is no concern about unsecured firearms or anything of that nature?
Not in this specific scene, just the fact that we had control of the area. So there was no concern of a student in that immediate area. As far as the outside, we did assume control of that as well. But yes, that was the circumstance of that scenario.
Okay. Now, I just want to talk briefly about getting into this building, Creststone. So when you're getting in to the actual physical building itself, it requires the key, right?
Correct.
Now, when you get to the inner portions of the building, there's specific pods, and the one that we're talking about today is number 108, correct?
Correct.
So in getting into the specific pods, I believe you said that you have to have a physical key, like a person would normally have for their house?
Correct.
And this physical key, is it then used for the doors that are contained within the pod? The units A, B, C, and D, do they have their own locks?
No, that key is like a master key.
Okay. So when you say that, that means, for example, if I was in unit A, and I would go in there, and I lock the door, anybody who has a key to that front door to 108 could get within unit A.
I would say if they have the master key that was provided to the pro staff of the student employees, they could access all the doors. However, the individual residents of each room, their keys will not work in the other units.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay. So for unit A, if you were to have a key for that door, that key for unit A would not then work for unit C.
Correct.
No further questions, thank you.
I think I only specifically asked you if you found any weapons in room B. Did you find any weapons anywhere throughout the search of the entire pod?
No weapons found.
No further questions. I think our witness will be excused.
All right, anything else of this witness?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Sir, you're excused, you're free to go. All right, Mr. Miller.
Your Honor, we called Detective Kirk.
What was the last name?
Kirk, K-E-R-R. Colorado Springs PD.
Sir, if you'd step up here in front of the witness stand, please, I will administer the oath to you. Swear to penalty of perjury that the evidence you shall give in the case now and herein shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir.
Please have a seat. Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, officer, detective. Would you identify yourself and spell your first and last names for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Matt Kerr, K-E-R-R.
Sir, what do you do for a living?
I'm a homicide detective with the Colorado Springs Police Department.
And how long have you been a police officer with CSPD?
It's been just over 20 years.
Okay, and how long have you been assigned as a homicide detective?
I've been assigned just short of 5 years in homicide, and have done kind of a almost 50-50 mix of uniformed and detective assignments, but the last 5 years has been in homicide.
Okay, and just briefly, what are your duties as a homicide detective?
So my duties are our primary duty is to conduct death investigations, some of those criminal and some not, but primarily most of our involvement or time is spent investigating homicides or criminal murders. During that, the course of an investigation, my roles could go through a lot of different areas. Typically, we break them into 5 roles, that being the lead detective, and typically they may be assigned to a suspect role, the scene detective, the witness detective, forgetting one here. And then we typically have like support detectives that would do video surveillance or other key while they're assigned at the beginning of a case, can change depending on the nature of the case.
Sure. So let's talk about the reason we're here, the events of February 16th, 2024. Were you dispatched to the UCCS campus earlier that morning?
Not directly to the campus, but yes, I was notified by my supervisor about 7 o'clock that morning that there had been a suspected homicide at the UCCS campus. During the initial assignments, I learned that there was a reporting party and witness who was going to be transported to the Police Operations Center, and I was assigned to go and interview that person.
Okay, so to be clear, you did not respond after the scene on Clyde Way that morning?
Not that morning. Later in the day, I arrived at the campus, but I never entered the scene or did any investigation directly at the scene that day.
Okay. And so, what was the name of this person that you were assigned to interview?
Giancarlo is his name. It's Giancarlo. Last name Argueta, Argueta.
And was it explained to you by your chain of command what this person's role in all this was, at least initially?
I believe I was told he was potentially an occupant of the dorm where the shooting had occurred, and that he had called 911.
Okay. And so when did you begin your interview with him that morning?
Gosh, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact time.
Roughly.
I would guess it was sometime between 8 and 9 in the morning.
How would you describe his demeanor before he encountered you?
When I first encountered Giancarlo, he was sick. He had a cold, and I could tell he was tired and not feeling particularly well physically. He was pretty calm and collected initially and throughout most of the interview. And he was very, I guess, understanding when I tried to explain, why I was going to be asking certain questions and things like that. He was very deferential, I guess, to those explanations.
Okay. And so, did you come to find out that he actually was a student at UCCS?
Yes.
And where did he reside?
So he lived at the scene, 46, the address is probably going to escape me, 4645 Clyde Way, I believe, and he lived in the Unit B of the apartment, which I believe was 108.
Okay. And do you know how these rooms were configured? Can you just briefly explain that?
Yes, and again, this isn't from personal knowledge, this is from how he kind of educated me through our interview and drew on a map for me of the apartment. So it was a first floor apartment set up with room for 4 occupants. So the apartment building could be accessed through a couple doors on either end of the building that were key card controlled, and then there was an interior entrance to his specific 4-person unit from the hallway. The way he described it being laid out is if you are standing at the front door and you enter the apartment, immediately ahead would be kind of a living room, and immediately to the right would be a kitchen and dining area. And then to the left, there was a door along the wall. If you entered that door, you kind of enter another small area that provides access to 2 bedrooms and a sink, shower, and toilet area. So that would be like on the left.
Okay.
On the right would be kind of a mirror image of that on the left. There was another door leading from the common area into another area where there were 2 bedrooms along with a toilet, shower, and sink area.
And so which one of these rooms did he reside in?
He was to the left, and in the first door, the first of the 2 bedrooms.
And then did he ever identify who his neighbor was, the next one to the left over?
Yes, his name was Samuel Knott. Spelling is Knott.
And was Mr. Knott a student at UCCS as well?
Yes.
And so let's talk a little bit about the living arrangements. How long have these, Mr. Knott and Mr. are going to live in that particular Your Honor,
No objections, overruled. Go ahead.
thank you. So did he describe, for example, how long they had been living together as roommates?
So he and Sam had moved in together in what would have been the fall semester of 2023.
Okay. And did he describe any other roommates living there recently?
Yes. So during the fall semester, he had a roommate he knew only as Tim, but who was later identified as Timothy Cecil, C-E-C-I-L. And Mr. Cecil, Mr. Knopp, and Mr. Argeta were the three occupants. Giancarlo advised me that at sometime probably in October or November, per his recollection, another roommate had been an emergency move-in, and he knew that roommate as Nick.
Okay. Did he ever know the Nick's last name?
He could not remember it, though.
And so how would he describe to you the relationship amongst the four of those young men in that pod, I guess, starting in late 2023 going into early 2024?
Initially, there wasn't too much of a problem when Nick moved in, but pretty shortly after, he said that there started to be some problems between roommates. He described particularly that Nick smoked marijuana heavily, kind of continuously, and that caused a lot of odor of marijuana throughout the apartment, which was concerning to Giancarlo due to his involvement in ROTC. He also described that there then started to be some loud music played very early in the morning, coming from Nick's room, so it would be between like 6 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the morning, which he said the music was pretty overly loud and that it kind of just was out of character for how they had been living before that, as far as what, everybody was getting along pretty well, and then, now they're dealing with this kind of marijuana all the time and the loud music. There were some discussions amongst the roommates with Nick, and my understanding is that the music at least kind of toned down for a while, but the marijuana was kind of an ongoing issue.
And at some point, did that lead to strife between Giancarlo, Mr. Knopp, and the other roommates that were there?
Yes, and there's a kind of a series of events. Two of them are kind of more notable, I would say. The first was there was an issue with the toilet on that side, that being the C and D side, where Nick.
I'm gonna project a relevance at this point, and see where this is going, and how it pertains to this particular preliminary hearing and the evidence of these charges.
Objections, overruled. Go ahead.
You may answer.
So there was a conflict between Nick and Tim when this toilet overflowed. Giancarlo described that both parties kind of refused to clean it up. Tim was upset and telling Nick that Nick had caused this. Nick was saying that the toilet was broken, so they were kind of back and forth. And ultimately, Giancarlo kind of stepped in and described himself as kind of a peacemaker between the two of them. Actually sent Tim for a walk because it was getting heated enough that he thought it could get physical between Nick and Tim. There was, that happened a couple times, but the second incident was when it became close to physical, and that he referenced that being maybe around Thanksgiving,
Okay.
23.
And who was that? Was that between, question?
Nick and Tim. So Tim,
Well, let me just stop you. So at some point, did Sam become involved
Yeah.
in these interactions?
yes, so what Giancarlo believed was that Tim was moving elsewhere at the end of the semester, and when they all, from my understanding, both Sam and Giancarlo left campus for the holiday break after first semester was over. When both parties returned to the campus for the start of the second semester, so that would have been in early January. I guess my understanding was trash, a lot of kind of filth in the kitchen, and it was just not in good condition. That is where it really started to lead to some conflict between Sam and Nick. Giancarlo was present when some conversations happened about taking trash out, and his understanding was that Nick just never took any of his own trash out. And then I believe it was a day or two before classes started in the spring semester of 2024. It kind of came to a head one day where Sam confronted Nick about the trash. Nick just kind of told them he didn't care and left the apartment. After he did so, Sam and Giancarlo bagged up the trash and they put it inside from my understanding, kind of the little common area that provides access to the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom facilities on the C and D side. They just set the trash in there, hoping to encourage Nick to take that out when he returned.
And so let me just move forward a little bit. And so based upon this, at some point did hostilities actually kind of emerge?
Yes, Nick returned and came over to the A and B side, kind of stood in the door and confronted Giancarlo and Sam about the trash. My understanding is that Sam and Nick kind of began insulting one another, and at some point, Sam referenced that he would contact campus services to make a complaint about this, and Giancarlo heard Nick say that there would be consequences if he did that. Sam continued getting pretty elevated in response to that, and Nick then directly told Sam, "I'll kill you." At that point in the conversation, Sam, I guess, took his phone out as if to call 911, and Giancarlo stepped in, tried to get everybody just to cool off, and so the police were not immediately called by Sam, although he had indicated he was going to. And Giancarlo kind of stepped in and got everyone to settle down at that moment.
And so at some point, were the authorities at UCCS, the police department, they're notified about this interaction?
Yes, my understanding, Giancarlo had been in contact with the resident assistant, who he identified to me as KD, and KD had kind of been talking to him about potential housing options. And at that point, he notified her of what took place, and she talked to, I guess, her bosses and told him that because there was a threat, she had to call the police. And so at that point, UCCS police went over and responded to speak to both Sam and Giancarlo, and then eventually spoke to Nick.
Okay. And did you ever find any corroboration, such as a police report from UCCS documenting that incident?
I do believe there is a UCCS police report. I haven't personally reviewed that, but I know of its existence.
And did you find any other, for example, communications with housing and so forth, referencing that Sam and Giancarlo were upset with Nick and wanted to move out of the apartment?
Yes, I did find emails and text communications in Giancarlo's phone that were saved, where he had been speaking with Katie and others and had actually filled out an application to move to a different apartment, actually later in the day on February 16th. And my understanding was that Sam had done a similar process to fill out that application and was going to be moving with Giancarlo to a new apartment that same day.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the morning of the event. Giancarlo, as we've heard, is one of the reporting parties, the initial reporting party. How did he describe the incident to you that, leading up to that? So, for example, the previous evening up until 6 o'clock that morning.
So, Giancarlo had been out of the country for about a week, attending a family event, and he had not actually physically seen Sam or Nick when he returned. However, he strongly believed when he entered, so this would have been the 14th, that Nick was likely there because the marijuana smell was very strong. On the evening of the 15th, he had been away during that time, this may have been, or early in the morning on the 16th, Sam, asked him about his trip and just made small talk, but then said, hey, did you hear Nick is back? The back reference was just that there was a time when they believed Nick may have left because there was no more marijuana odor and they never heard any activity. So he said, hey, Nick is back over here. Giancarlo didn't know exactly if that meant that Nick had been over on the AB side where Sam and Giancarlo lived, or if that just meant he had been back in the apartment as a whole. But they briefly discussed that, but that was kind of the end of their conversation that night. Giancarlo said that after that he tried to study and spoke to a friend on the phone until he estimated probably about 1:20 in the morning, and then he decided he needed to get some sleep. So he said he fell pretty much immediately asleep. He was very tired and sick. He did reference that he had notified his chain of command that he would not be making it to his PT, which would have been scheduled for 6 o'clock that morning, just due to the fact that he had some tests coming up and he was not well physically. And so he normally would have been up about 4:30 to check weather and things like that as part of his responsibilities, but instead he slept in. So then he described that he was very much asleep when he was awakened to loud banging sounds. He said he did not immediately perceive them to be gunshots, but since that time he believed that's what he was hearing, and that he heard what he thought were 7 to 9 gunshots fired. Giancarlo said it took him a moment to kind of come to awareness of what was going on, and in the immediate aftermath of the gunshots, he heard a woman cry or sounding in distress, and he then could hear a groaning sound or a humming sound coming from who he believed to be Sam next door.
And he tried to call Sam.
He did. So in that moment, just prior to that, he also heard footsteps and a door close, and the footsteps sounded as someone was running. He placed a call to Sam, and he could hear he described it as being a violin tune on Sam's phone ringing, but Sam didn't answer. He said he hung up from there and then contacted UCCS police because he was afraid of exiting his room. He didn't know if whoever had maybe just fired shots maybe right outside his door, so he stayed in his room.
And so did you find anything that corroborates roughly the calls that he made, the contact with UCCS police?
Yes, his phone was forensically downloaded. Unfortunately, the phone forensic download did not associate dates and times with some of the data. But later, once I made that realization, I actually met with Giancarlo and looked at his phone call log as it would display on his phone, and I did verify that he had placed a call to Sam at 5:58 a.m. on the 16th, and he had called the UCCS police phone number 1 minute later at 5:59.
And so what did the rest of your interview with Giancarlo just generally consist of?
Well, obviously we ran through all of those events and the significant background that of all the parties involved. Giancarlo was concerned. He said he didn't know who had done this. He didn't want to be the only person kind of pointing out Nick, but at that time, we covered a lot of other information. Did Sam have any other enemies? We talked about associates, friends, girlfriends, all that kind of thing. And he was only aware of a few people in Sam's life. They weren't very close, but got along well. And then ultimately, I helped him with contacting parents, just things like that I would help a college kid with.
Sure.
And toward the end of our contact together, he became pretty emotional, had a very strong emotional reaction to the fact that he felt
So just generally, was there anything inconsistent in any of the details that he told you throughout this interview?
No, he was very detail oriented as far as times went, so there was a time when he was a few minutes off in stating what time he thought it had been when he woke up. But that was less than 5 minutes of a difference. Other than that, his statement remained pretty consistent, and I was able to verify a lot of what he told me through his phone contacts and other records.
Thank you, sir.
Cross-examination.
Hey, Judge. John, you might stay at the council table, I just have a few things.
Okay, just make sure you speak up.
Yes, Judge. Court reporter, can you hear me okay?
I'm fine, thank you.
And Detective Curry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Detective, I'm gonna go over a few different things that you did as part of your investigation. We're gonna talk a lot about the interview you did with Jim Carlo, okay?
Okay.
I'm gonna start kind of from the incident, but some of the questions that you asked Jim Carlo. And specifically, you kind of asked about how you got access into the room. Do you remember this?
Yes.
And you were kind of asking about keys and how he might have gotten it.
Yes.
And he told you there were basically 2 separate keys you have to use to get into your room.
That's correct, yes. There are 2 separate devices, we'll say.
Yeah,
That were
that's
accurate.
fair, but there's one to get you into the building,
Yes.
and then there's one to get you into the room.
Well, yeah, and the one that gets you into the room also gets you into the common area of the apartment and into an individual room. So my understanding is that device was functional for 2 separate doors, that being the main apartment door and the room inside. So
Okay.
for example, his was room B, so that's what he would use to get into that.
You beat me to it, but just to clarify some of that, that room key, all right, the one that gets you into B, also opens the main pod door.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you talked to Giancarlo about kind of what he hears this morning, and it's like 5:55, pretty late, almost 6.
Right. Yes.
He tells you he hears some loud bangs, and then he hears what sounds like a woman.
That's correct.
And then he hears what he thought to be a Mr. Tom.
Correct.
And then after the bangs, you already talked about it, he said he heard some running, and then a door shut.
Yes.
And to Giancarlo, he kind of mentioned that that door didn't slam.
That's correct.
And he was talking about that pod door, that front door, right?
That was my understanding. It was a little bit difficult, not having been in one of those pods, for me to fully understand. But I believe he was saying that front door to the main common area that comes from the hallway would slam if someone let it slam.
And he kind of mentioned this a couple times through your interview, but he kind of acknowledged it was kind of weird in his head that he didn't hear it slam.
That's correct.
And as part of this, you in fact asked him kind of how thin the walls were, what you could hear.
Yes.
And he kind of talked a little bit about this with you, but he said that he could usually hear the door slam if he was inside his room, and sometimes could hear his roommate next to him.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so both of those things?
Yes.
All right, just to make sure. So when you're talking to Giancarlo, he's talking a little bit about he gets back and it's like almost 1 a.m., right?
Yes, I believe so.
And-
Sometime after midnight. Yeah.
And in fact, you got his phone from him at one point in time.
I did.
And you essentially searched through the phone. You basically ran a data search on his phone. I'm probably saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I obtained a forensic download of the phone and searched it, the contents of that, and then I also did some follow-up when I had some questions again with his actual live device, and that just being, I believe it was after associated with those in the forensic download, and I'm sorry, I can't answer why. But those were associated on his physical device. So I don't know if it was an operating system thing or something, but it didn't store that data and associate it. And so that's why I did both means of follow-up on his device.
And in that follow-up you're talking about, you had kind of talked about when you were talking with the district attorney, that was another time that you kind of went out and talked to Jim Colley.
Yes, I met with him, I think it was on March 1st.
Do you recall as part of that analyzation, you looked at specific phone activity?
Yes.
And by phone activity, we're talking about like when the phone is being used.
That's correct.
And as homicide detective, you've dealt with kind of tracking phones, seeing when phones are being used as part of your investigation.
Yes.
Okay. So you know when you're kind of looking at these phones, you're trying to find when are these being used, where are they being used.
Yes, and I would just clarify that there's times that I may see activity in a phone, and I can't always say that the phone is being actively used because our smart devices interact so often with networks and things that there are a lot of different data points stored in a phone, some of which I'm not able to say whether that's the phone passively talking to a network and maybe receiving an email, for example, or whether that's the person actively using the device. But typically things like call logs and text messages and things like that are going to require active use.
Okay. And as part of this, in analyzing Jim Colley's phone, you noted that the phone was regularly used until about 12:58 a.m.
I believe so, but I know that there's a timeline in my report kind of all those different times.
Officer, do you need to see that
If
timeline?
I could, I've got here, if you could direct me to a page.
That's totally fine, just to be
Just-
certain, just to refresh your recollection about something.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm looking at your report. Looks like from February 29th.
Does it have that Bates stamp on top, sir?
Yes, it's 010612 or discovery page 724. That's just this.
01, you said 612?
612. And then the specific page I was looking at, you have a subsection titled timeline. It's towards the back. I think it's the second to last page of that report.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you able to kind of familiarize yourself with some of that
Yes.
and kind of refresh your recollection about the specific analysis that you did?
Yes.
So to bring your attention back to that, after 12:58, there's actually a break in Jim Carlo's phone usage where it doesn't look like it's being used. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that lasts until, looks like about 1:39 a.m.
Yes.
And then there's another break, there's some usage at 2:07 to about 2:12.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, 212?
2:12.
Thank you.
And then there's this another break where we also see emails and a couple other notifications until that 5:57 call.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and I don't believe the call was actually 5:57, but the phone kind of appeared, there was a lot more activity in the timeline beginning at 5:57.
Okay. So the phone, that's a fair clarification. The phone had activity at 5:57.
Correct.
Okay. I want to also then talk about some of these roommate issues that you were talking about on direct examination. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to break these into, I guess, kind of categories. And you kind of did this in your interview, but I'm breaking them into 3 separate issues. Okay.
Okay.
There is a toilet issue.
Yes.
Well, I guess it's 4 really. A music issue,
Yes.
a weed issue, and then this trash issue.
Correct.
So,
And, I mean, maybe kind of the roommate issue as well, or the unauthorized people living there,
right,
although I don't know that that came up as a focus.
okay. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well, but kind of timeline-wise, there's this toilet issue that's kind of in during the, I'll call it the fall semester, it's kind of Thanksgiving, December time.
Yeah, getting close to finals is kind of what he clarified that.
And then there's this music issue that seemed to have been also kind of early on.
Correct.
Okay. And then the weed issue, I think as you stated, was somewhat ongoing.
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, we have this trash issue that we'll also kind of get into. But it seemed that maybe the trash issue was also on.
Yes.
Now, when we're thinking about a couple of these issues, Giancarlo actually told you that he confronted Nick about a couple of these things.
That's correct.
And specifically, again, you talked about a little bit, the music issue. He brought up specifically, Nick, that it was an issue.
Yes.
And as a result of bringing that up to Nick, he ended up actually turning it down.
Yes, it appeared to kind of rectify that issue.
Okay. And when Giancarlo was telling you about the music issue and confronting Nick, he didn't tell you that Nick threatened him.
No.
He didn't tell you that Nick said, "I'm going to kill you,"
No.
or tried to assault him.
No.
He just said that he was like, "Okay, I'll turn it down."
Correct.
And then when we get to the weed issue, we also have, again, Giancarlo confronting Nick about it.
Yes.
And again, there was some back and forth between Nick and Giancarlo about the weed.
Yes.
But then Nick said, "Okay, I will do something," and he ended up getting a fan.
Yes.
And again, when Giancarlo was telling you about this, he's not saying when confronting Nick that Nick was threatening him or trying to assault him.
No.
And then we have this toilet issue that I'm going to come back to that involves the fourth roommate, Tim.
Correct.
Sorry, not a good question. But Tim ends up moving out at the end of the fall semester. And do you recall how Giancarlo described him?
Roughly, yes.
Roughly. Does he describe Tim as a black man?
Yes.
About a little under 6 foot?
Yes.
And during this incident, you talked about it as well, but Tim and Nick kind of get into it.
That's correct.
And they're kind of going back and forth for who caused this toilet issue.
Yes.
And again, to somewhat be a little graphic, the toilet issue is essentially the toilet's clogged.
Yes, Giancarlo ended up, on one of the occasions at least, using a plunger to fix the problem, so that was my assumption, and his, and that it was clogged.
And then Giancarlo also told them to clean up and kind of get rid of some of the flooding that had occurred.
Yes.
To come to the trash incident that specifically happens, I think it's January, is that right?
Yes.
Like you said, Giancarlo kind of described himself as a peacemaker in this incident.
Yes.
And to kind of to get into some of the details of this, they were upset with Nick for not taking trash out while they were on break.
That's correct.
And
And I think subsequently as well,
okay.
my understanding was that one of the females may have taken trash out, but then it was full again on the day that the fight happened. At least that's kind of how I understood it.
Okay. And to that point, like you said, Nick leaves and they tie up the trash and they kind of put it out front, outside of the door.
Correct.
And that was apartment C.
I don't know if they put it right outside of his door, but they put it inside the access for CMP, somewhere in there where it would be visible to Nick. I just don't know the exact location of that.
back and he sees the trash and becomes upset, right?
Correct.
And then Sam and Nick basically get into it.
Notably, yes.
And Giancarlo, in fact, describes them as very aggressive.
Yes.
And he even says at one point in time he puts a hand on Sam, trying to tell him to cool it out.
Correct.
And when they're talking back and forth, they're kind of insulting each other, right?
Yes.
And some of those insults were kind of pointed. Sam says, "You were just a little man," or something along those lines.
Yes.
And again, they're getting into it, and Giancarlo's trying to break it up, but these insults keep going back and forth.
That's correct.
Then we get to this point where Nick apparently says that your actions have consequences. Right?
Did you say your actions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Nick says, according to
Sorry, I thought you
Giancarlo,
said a different word. Yes, you did say that.
sorry. According to Giancarlo, to be specific, Nick says your actions have consequences, and that's directed at Sam.
Yes.
And
And I
Sam,
believe that's in direct response to Sam implying that you would file a complaint with housing.
right. And Sam responds something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, you know, you're not doing shit at all. You're just a nobody."
Yes, that's correct.
And then Giancarlo describes that Nick then gets mad and says the bit of, "I'm gonna kill you."
Correct.
Now, Giancarlo never says that Nick threatens him or anything like that during that incident.
You mean threatens Giancarlo?
Yes.
No, he did not.
And he doesn't swing on him or try to assault him or punch him or anything.
No, I'm not aware that that disturbance was physical beyond Giancarlo placing his hand on Sam. So no, there was no physical altercation.
And as well, as part of this, you talked about it previously, but the police, or at least campus police, are called to Pod 108 about this incident.
Again, I don't believe they're called directly there at that time. I believe they met with them in a common area of the building itself after being notified by housing, not by Sam or Giancarlo.
Thank you for the clarification. And during that, Sam says he doesn't want to press any kind of charges.
That's my understanding, yes. Or that, I believe that's what Giancarlo's understanding was.
And as well as part of your investigation, detective, you've never seen any specific charges to Nick coming from that incident.
No, again, I'm aware of that incident report or case report by UCCS police. I didn't review that in its entirety
Okay.
prior to this hearing.
Now, Giancarlo describes Nick as a quote, weed head.
Correct.
He says it a couple times and describes some of his speech as unintelligible,
Yes, that's correct.
kind of mumbling or can't quite hear him.
Yeah, I remember him talking about it being mumbling, and also just, just difficult to understand what he's trying to convey.
And he kind of also described at one point to you that it was like, quote, talking to a zombie.
Yes.
Now, after the trash incident and they talked to housing, housing in fact says, we will give you emergency housing, leave out of the room if you want.
Yes.
But they don't.
Correct.
They later, after that incident, closer to the February 16th, they are trying to move out.
Well, I believe that Giancarlo actually started the process of finding a permanent solution to the problem, meaning moving to, instead of just emergency housing, he wanted to find a longer-term solution
information that there were any remaining belongings in the C or D rooms.
So I believe there is information about that in this investigation, but again, in my specific role, I didn't look into all of the UCCS reports about that, and I also did not do the scene investigation, so I don't know for sure what is there or not.
That's fine, Detective. To come back to the morning of February 16th, Giancarlo says he awakes to these loud bangs.
Yes, that's correct.
So he doesn't hear anything prior to that. There's no loud noises prior to that.
No, he didn't remember waking up or hearing anything after, between the time he went to bed and the time he awoke to those noises.
So to be clear, Detective, he doesn't hear any yelling.
No,
He doesn't hear any like loud knocking.
no, he doesn't hear anything.
And to that point, he in fact told you that Sam always locks his door at night.
Yes.
And he mentions that a couple of times, but Sam to him always locks his door at night.
Yes.
As for the gunshots that Giancarlo hears, how many does he say he hears again?
7 to 9.
7 to 9. And does he describe them as fast, slow?
Not that I remember.
Okay. You don't recall him saying anything about them being like rapid or anything like that?
Not sitting here right now, I don't remember. No.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all good.
Any redirect examination?
Just briefly, Your Honor. The defense counsel was asking you about the phone and what all that stuff means. That would have been analyzed by an expert at some point in this investigation, wouldn't it? As far as what those, whether it's interacting or whether it's just somebody making a call or sending an email, something like that.
Well, I can't say that. I was the person analyzing the actual data there. They extract the data and try to verify that, they've gotten everything forensically downloaded from the device that they can. But I was the person kind of
Okay.
reviewing that, and again, I have quite a bit of experience with that, so I sometimes can make sense of what that's saying, but it was not independently looked at by an expert at this time.
And there was nothing inconsistent what you saw from what Giancarlo was telling you, was there?
No, especially when I was able to compare what was stored, or what was forensically downloaded with what was actually visible on his phone. Those contents didn't appear to match, it's just that some of the contents didn't associate a date and time.
Sure. And then the last thing I'll ask you, so Giancarlo was actually physically present when Nick threatened Sam, is that correct?
Yes.
Anything else of this witness?
Or,
All right, Detective, you're free to go at this point.
We will next call and stand, Detective Crowfoot.
Detective, if you'd step up here, please, I'll administer the oath. Swear to tell the perjury that the evidence you shall give in the case now and hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
yes, Your Honor.
Present it. Mr. Vaughn?
Thank you. You say your name, spell your last.
Yes, so my name is Detective Ed Crowfoot, C-R-O-F-O-O-T.
What do you do, Detective?
I am a detective with Colorado Springs Police Department.
How long have you been doing that for?
I've been a police officer with Colorado Springs for just over 17 years, and a homicide detective with the Violent Crimes Unit, detective assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit since January 2017.
Did the Violent Crimes Unit receive a call on February 16th, 2024 related to a double homicide?
Yes, sir.
Were you a part of that team?
Yes, sir. So I was called by my supervisor. I was assigned as the lead detective with the suspect role. I was advised that there was a shooting incident with 2 victims, a male and a female, in a dormitory residence at UCCS here in Colorado Springs in El Paso County.
Did you and your homicide investigation team respond?
Yes, we did.
What was your role in this team?
So I was the lead detective with a suspect role assigned. So my initial response included going to UCCS campus, to the Crestone House dormitory on Clyde Way, at which time I contacted the patrol supervisors and patrol officers that were securing the scene, made sure that the scene was adequately secured, that they had enough resources to maintain security of that scene and area, as there was multiple floors in this dormitory and many students in and out and around the campus that would begin to move freely as it was after 7 a.m.
So it's a 5-story building?
Correct.
And where's your crime scene? What
So,
floor? Sorry.
Yeah, so the scene was in apartment 108 or pod 108. It's on the first floor of the Crestone House located on the most eastern corner of that building.
If you draw your attention to what's been marked for identification as People's Exhibit 5 in front of you.
Right.
Do you recognize People's Exhibit 5?
I do, yes, sir.
What is it?
So that'll be 2 photographs of the Crestone House, the eastern face of that building. There's an exterior entry door into the main building on that east side, identified as Crestone House East Entrance. And then there's also kind of a floor plan of that side of the building that includes apartment 108.
And there's 2 little circles drawn. What are those used to identify?
So the red circles circle the eastern exterior exit that is, or entrance and exit into that building, identified as Crestone House East.
A fair and accurate representation of Crestone House and Pod 108.
Correct, yes, sir.
You know, people move to admit Exhibit 5 into evidence.
Any objection?
None for this hearing, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 5 is admitted.
Did detectives try to ascertain whether they had all of the available keys at the scene for Pod 108?
So, with UCCS police officers and detectives on scene, Detective Lee was assigned as the scene detective. They did have confirmation from UCCS housing that all of the keys were.
Usually answer calls for hearsay on multiple ones.
Objections or notes, go ahead.
That keys assigned to rooms A and B were issued to Samuel Knopp and John Carlo for A and B. Nicholas Jordan was assigned room C, and room D was vacant, and the key was in the housing office.
So were any keys missing from the scene then at the time?
No, sir.
What about any signs of forced entry?
So Detective Lee and CSIs searched through all of apartment 108, which included all of apartments A, B, C, and D, specifically with the main hallway entry into apartment 108. There was no forced entry into that doorway. You still needed key access in order to enter that apartment. There was no damage to allow that door just to open freely. And then there was no forced entry on any of the interior doors accessing apartments A and B. And then there was no forced entry in apartment A.
So I want to kind of start in reverse order. Let's start with Suite D. Did officers make entry into Suite D, and what was the condition of it?
So I was advised that detectives did conduct a search of apartment D. There was no personal belongings. The only things inside that room was the dormitory furniture, so a desk, a bed, and furniture such as that, but no personal belongings for anyone.
What about Suite C?
Suite C was the same condition, had the dormitory furniture, but no personal belongings. There was some debris and cigarette butts and cigar remnants inside the room, but personal belongings were not found.
Was this the room that UCCS identified as belonging to Nicholas Jordan?
That is correct.
The objection is overruled.
Now let's go to Suite B. What was any evidence or value in Unity?
So Detective Lee did conduct a search of John Carlo's room number B. His personal belongings were still inside the room, and they did not observe any items that they collected as evidence related to the shooting in this case.
Now turning ultimately to room A, Suite A. To be clear, no signs of forced entry in Suite A?
That is correct.
But there was items of evidence recovered from Suite A.
Yes, multiple items of evidence related to this investigation and the shooting were collected from that room.
I want to focus mainly on the shell casings and projectiles recovered. Were there in fact projectiles and cartridges recovered?
Yes, sir, there were.
More than one?
11, yes, sir.
I'd like to draw your attention to what's been marked for identification as People's Exhibit 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize 6 through 10?
I do, yes, sir.
What is it?
So, they are beginning with 6, the overhead diagram produced by CSIs responding to the scene, identifying evidence items that were located in Samuel Knopf's room, identified as room A. And the 7 through 10 are photographs of the placards and the evidence items as they were located in Samuel Knopf's room.
And Exhibit 6 reflects a sort of key code to determine what the colors mean.
That is correct.
You know, a fair and accurate representation of the CSI sketch along with the photos of the actual shell casings, fair and accurate representation in People Exhibit 6 through 10.
That is correct.
You know, the people usually that People Exhibit 6 through 10.
Any objection?
Defense does object. Exhibit 7, 8, 9, and 10 all contain out-of-court statements that are being offered to the truth and that is asserted. That is hearsay. I know that there's some allowance for it in the preliminary hearing, essentially presenting a police report to the court as evidence. It's not proper. No objection.
Mr. Vaughn?
Judge, I'm not presenting any police report as evidence. I'm simply giving the court photographs with verbal representations as to what those photos are. If defense counsel would like further foundation for those statements, I'm happy to do that, as I was planning on doing that right now and right after admission.
The objection is overruled. You may proceed.
So I want to start with shell casings 1 and 3, or cartridges. What's a better term?
So cartridge, or spent cartridge case would be the term used.
So I want to start with the spent shell cartridges of 1 through 3. Where were those generally found?
I'm sorry, Mr. Vaughn. Start with the spent cartridge of what?
1 through 3 as marked in Exhibit 6.
So the spent cartridge cases identified as 1, 2, and 3 were located in Exhibit 6 as placard number 1. Was a backpack unzipped and open on the floor, and 3 spent cartridge cases were located in the open pouch of that backpack next to the doorway.
And what about cartridges 4? Where was 4 generally found?
So the next Each of those has a locking function and a kind of a scan card. And so you can either have an actual assigned student ID that allows you access into the dormitories, or there's an application that students can download and have on their cellular device that will transmit a signal that will allow them access into the dormitories if they are allowed access via that electronic system.
Did you find any relevant entries in this system for Nicholas Jordan?
Yes, sir. So Nicholas Jordan had 2 scan card entries into the east door of Crestone House, the first of which was at 3:53 a.m. on the morning of the 16th, and another one at 5:42 a.m. on the morning of the 16th. And those were the only 2 entries into the east side of that building between midnight and 9 a.m. when detectives were on scene.
I want to drill in on the timeline then. So you said 5:42 a.m. Do you recall when the first call for service for shots fired occurred?
I believe it was 5:57 a.m. when the first calls for shooting were received by UCCS police.
So we're talking sometime less than 20 minutes before the shooting.
That's correct.
Time frame here.
Correct.
Were there any other entry log on these doors other than at this exact time around when the shooting occurred that were relevant to your investigation?
No, sir.
Any of them at all, relevant or otherwise?
Not to the east door specifically, where Nicholas Jordan entered. He was the only one that did enter in that. And I know that the next scan card into the building was just before 9 a.m. by another student using the south door of Crestone House.
So fair to say it was pretty much exclusively used at this time by Nicholas Jordan according to these logs?
Correct.
Now I want to talk about whether you obtained records about Mr. Jordan's request to withdraw from classes. Were you provided with that information from UCCS?
Yes, so there was records that indicated that Nicholas Jordan sent an email to the school requesting to be withdrawn from classes on Thursday, February 15th, just before, or at 3 p.m.
So now we're time frame approximately 4.5 hours prior to the shooting is when he attempts to withdraw from his classes.
14, not 4.
That's like 14 hours.
Yes, sir.
Are there any relevant cameras that were on campus that you examined?
So UCCS confirmed with us that there were no cameras associated with any of the dormitory buildings on exterior or interior of that. There was a pole camera that had been installed at the base of the driveways and accesses of Alpine Village. So that pole camera is affixed off of Clyde Way near kind of the roundabout area, and it directs its viewpoint up the large concrete walkway in between the dormitory facilities. It does show the vantage point of Crestone House and the gap between the Kuchar's house directly to the west and Crestone House where the shooting scene was located.
I'm going to draw your attention to People's Exhibit number 11 in front of you. What is 11?
So these are still photographs captured while reviewing video surveillance from that pole camera that is affixed at the base of Alpine Village. And those are photographs, still photographs taken during that video of a subject in dark clothing passing in between Crestone House and Kuchar's house towards the east exit of Crestone House at 5:41 and 5:56 a.m.
Are they very accurate photographs?
Yes, they are.
People move to admit People's Exhibit 11 into evidence.
Any objection?
For purposes of this hearing.
All right, exhibit 11 is admitted.
Can you describe describe what this figure was doing?
So in the first photograph, it is at 11 minutes and 57 seconds in that time, video time. It is at 05:41 and 57 seconds. The subject in dark clothing crosses from west to east and disappears out of camera view at the east side of Crestone House.
Was it the same pace in both, coming and going? By pace, I mean walking, running, jogging?
While reviewing the first screen grab, that subject appears kind of at a walking pace. The second photograph is at 26 minutes and 30 seconds video time, and it is 05:56 hours and 39 seconds, and that is subject wearing dark clothing running from the east door of Crestone House back towards the Kucharis house from east to west, and goes out of view past that dormitory building, and that is at a running pace.
Did you observe anyone else on these cameras coming to and from during the time of the shooting?
No, sir.
I want to turn now to a traffic stop that CSBD conducted on January 20th, 2024. Can you tell the board about that?
Yes, so part of my responses as the suspect detective, once I was given the name Nicholas Jordan, I researched any contacts that CSPD might have had with Nicholas Jordan. In that, I found on January 20th of 2024, Mr. Jordan was stopped for a U-turn violation near Garden of the Gods here in Colorado Springs, and one of our...
What is the relevance of this?
It's how we ID the defendant and his car and how we eventually tracked him down.
Objections overruled, go ahead.
So in this, Nicholas Jordan was driving a black Ford Escape SUV with a temporary tag, in which time he told the officer during that stop and identified himself with a Michigan driver's license as Nicholas Jordan. He identified his current address as 4675 Clyde Way, apartment number 108, which is the Crestone House.
Did you take the temp tag he was using on that traffic stop and run it through the flock system?
Yes, sir. So I reviewed license plate reader camera images, and that black Ford Escape was observed at 747 on Corporate Center Drive here in Colorado Springs on February 16th, so just a few hours after the shooting. It was traveling southbound on Corporate Center Drive, which is just north of the UCCS complex.
Did CSPD put out any type of alert to other officers to be on the lookout for this vehicle, the particular vehicle that you associated with the defendant?
Yes, sir.
And we'll get to what the results of that information in a moment. But first, I want to just circle back around to the prior UCCS incidences that you were investigating at this time. I want to turn to the first incident that I want to talk about occurring on September 27th, 2023. We've already heard a substantial testimony about these incidences. I just want to hear your testimony of whether these incidences were confirmed with UCCS.
Correct, they were. So there was multiple instances in...
No, Jets. I'm talking about 5 months prior to this occurring, at an establishment incident.
Mr. Vaughn?
It's leading up to an ever-escalating battle between the roommates, which is essentially forms part of the motive for the crime. I don't plan on dwelling on it long, Your Honor.
The objection is overruled, go ahead.
So UCCS Police Department received complaints of Nicholas Jordan and actions and with other students at his previous apartment located in Lyons Village near Rock Rimmon Drive here in Colorado Springs. And that began in September of 2023. And then multiple instances on UCCS campus where UCCS police officers and housing managers or employees Nicholas Jordan and complaints from Samuel Knopp and John Carlo were received up until February 2024.
And I want to focus on maybe the most serious of those allegations. There is a report taken by UCCS on January 15th, 2024. We've heard some testimony about this, but can you confirm whether UCCS received that report?
They did. That report originated during some complaints and arguments over trash in apartment 108. And UCCS Police Department did respond and captured body-worn camera footage during their response and interactions. And that included the threats of Nicholas Jordan to kill Samuel Knopp.
And you touched on it a little bit before, but this UCCS housing wasn't the first sort of roommate incidences that this defendant was having, correct?
So as far as with roommates, I know that with his incidents and things happening with specific roommates assigned, was only at UCCS campus in this dormitory. I am aware that Nicholas Jordan lived at Lyons Village. It's kind of a student housing area here in Rock Rimmon, or near the Rock Rimmon Drive in Colorado Springs, which there were multiple complaints of Nicholas Jordan.
Objection, hearsay, objection, relevance.
Judge,
What is the relevance of this at the different housing areas?
Judge, the relevance of this is, if I eventually get to it, is there's neighbors complain at this other property, Lyons Village, leads eventually to his eviction, Your Honor. And then after he was evicted, he tries to locate and sort of hunt down the people that made those complaints, Your Honor. So I think it goes to 404B, I think it goes to after deliberation, and I think it goes to his general mental state, and how he reacts to complaints being made to him by neighbors.
I don't think we need to hear that today. Detective, you said something that I want to go back to. Did you say that the body-worn camera of the UCCS captured the supposed threat made by the defendant?
No, Your Honor, it captured the statements being made to the police officers taking that report.
About a threat?
Correct.
Oh, okay, I understand. Go ahead, Mr. Wong.
So let's move on to the autopsies then. Did CSP officers attend the autopsies of Samuel and Seeley?
Yes, sir, I attended the autopsies of both Samuel Knopp and Seeley Montgomery.
So let's start with Samuel. Who did his autopsy?
Dr. Murdoch.
How many gunshot wounds did Samuel have?
There were 8 separate gunshot wounds identified by Dr. Murdoch.
And were any projectiles recovered?
Yes, sir, there were multiple projectiles recovered.
Was the caliber of those projectiles able to be identified?
So the projectiles removed were classified as kind of medium. So medium to large caliber is kind of how they're classified by the coroner in his report. Those have not been evaluated by any of our firearms folks at this time.
Would it be consistent with a .40 caliber?
Yes, sir.
Now turning to Seeley, same doctor did her autopsy.
Correct.
How many times was she shot?
There were 4 gunshot wounds identified to Miss Montgomery.
And medium to large caliber projectiles?
Same, they were consistent.
Turning to your attention to People's Exhibits 21 and 22. Are those fair and accurate representations of the gunshot diagram for the 2 victims?
So yes, they will be the diagrams. Number 21 will be the written diagram and notated by the coroner's office of gunshot wound injuries to Miss Seeley Montgomery. And 22 will be the diagrams of gunshot wounds to the male victim, Samuel Knopp.
Understood. And fair and accurate representations?
Yes, they are.
People move to admit People's 21 and 22 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your
This here is a coroner's report. It has out-of-court statements that are being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. Detective Crowfoot is not established that he's the person that wrote these. We're relying essentially upon Dr. Murdoch's word and getting this admitted. Therefore, this is all hearsay contained on these exhibits, and the defense is objecting.
Mr. Vaughn?
It's a preliminary hearing, Your Honor, and my same response to all of his objections, which he's repeatedly making the same, Your Honor, and that is a prelim and hearsay is allowed, and the evidence rules are tampered.
The objection is overruled, and 21 and 22 are used.
How would you characterize how our victims were shot? Were they shot in the front and the back, just the front, just the back? How would you characterize it?
So there were gunshot entry wounds front and back along the torso and kind of pelvic regions of both victims.
Understood. And so I now want to do a little math. Samuel was shot 8 times, Celia was shot 4 times, so that's 12 wounds. But are you able to determine if each wound is associated with a unique bullet?
No, so the coroner's office and detectives on scene, while reviewing the injuries and what we would consider a defect, so any projectile traveling through a surface, it will leave that evidentiary mark or hole, we will call that a defect. In instance, we can count the number of defects, but there may be one single bullet projectile that causes multiple injuries or defects in a surface or in a body.
And you, to recap, you had 11 cartridges found at scene.
Yes, sir.
Now I want to focus now on when you arrested the defendant. Was he eventually spotted by law enforcement?
Yes, so detectives with our motor vehicle theft unit in the term classified as battle, which is their specific assignment going after stolen motor vehicles and subjects. So those detectives were on a battle deployment when they were near Uinta and 19th Street here in Colorado Springs. Detective Carroll observed a black Ford Escape with Colorado temp tags, and Mr. Jordan was seated in the driver's seat while it was parked at that location.
And how long after that did we actually take them into custody, and how was that performed?
So detectives maintained visual of the vehicle. The vehicle then left that location and drove north through Colorado Springs and came to a construction zone off of East Cliff Point Drive, I believe is how that street is identified. At which time, when that vehicle stopped and parked near the construction zone, tactical enforcement unit officers with CSPD as well as battle detectives did converge on Mr. Jordan as he was standing near the vehicle and took him into custody.
Without incident?
Without incident.
What did you do with the defendant after you took him into custody?
So detectives took Mr. Jordan into custody and transported him to the police operations center.
Did you interview him?
I did, yes, sir.
I want to draw your attention to People's Exhibit number 20.
Yes, sir.
What is 20?
That is a photograph I took of Mr. Jordan at the police operations center.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of Mr. Jordan as you took him into custody that day?
Yes, sir.
People moved him, people put him into evidence.
The objection?
No, Your Honor.
20 minutes?
Do you see this person here today?
I do, yes, sir.
Did you make an identification?
He will be the gentleman seated at the table with an orange shirt and with beard.
And you have a record to reflect identification of the defendant.
Any objection to the identification?
No, Your Honor.
All right. The record will reflect that the witness did identify the defendant.
So you conducted a lengthy interview. I want to focus on sort of the relevant parts of that interview. So I'll sort of just fast forward through, I guess I described it as the pleasantries. At any point, did you tell him What was his very first reaction to that?
His initial reaction to me, he stated, no, that he didn't have any information, related to that.
Did he seem surprised that there was an arrest warrant out for his arrest?
Yes, sir, he did.
Did you ask him when the last time he was on campus was?
I did. I asked him that question on multiple occasions. Mr. Jordan provided me with statements that he was not on campus, hadn't been on campus all semester. And eventually, I presented him with information and facts related to his key card access logs and showing that his key card made access into Crestone House. And it wasn't until presented with those facts and details that he admitted to me that he was on campus on Friday, February 16th.
Did he admit to knowing anything about?
Meeting.
I don't think we're to leading yet, Your Honor. I would suggest what the answer would be. Did he talk to you about anything, knowing anything about the murders?
So he told me he didn't have any idea why he would be charged with murder. I told him that I was investigating a shooting, and his response to me was he was not aware of any shootings on campus. And at that point in that interview, I had not mentioned anything happening at UCCS, or had not even said that there had been a shooting at UCCS. That was his response to me, but continued to deny having any knowledge of a shooting.
And at this point, he was still even denying, when you made that statement, he was even denying being on campus.
Correct.
Did you try to narrow down if he wasn't on campus, what city he was in, if he wasn't willing to admit he was on campus?
Through my conversations with Mr. Jordan, he explained to me that oftentimes he would just pass through Colorado Springs, that he believed in that time frame he was either in Denver or Pueblo
So you're saying he's not even being in Colorado Springs?
initially, yes.
Did you specifically ask about dates like that Thursday or Friday?
I did. I began to walk him through and asked him to tell me where he was or what he was doing on Thursday and Friday, referring to February 15th and February 16th. And his initial response to me was that he was either in Denver or, he said Pueblo as Pablo.
But continued to deny even being in the Springs?
Correct.
And then eventually you confronted him with his key card records. Did he give up much of a fight after you confronted him with that, or was it rather a quick change of course?
He took a few seconds to kind of intake the information that I was presenting to him, and then told me that he was passing through and had gone, and that it was him going to the bathroom in the hallway of the building.
Did you ask him about his roommates?
I did, yes, sir.
What was his initial answer to whether he had roommates?
So throughout my conversations with Mr. Jordan, I asked on several occasions for him to describe to me his roommates, or what their names were. He said he didn't know them like that, couldn't give me a description of them, and did not know their names.
Did you ask him when the last time he saw his roommates was?
Yes, I did. I asked him when he thought the last time he saw them. He said during first semester in the break time. He said that he had not been back to the room since the beginning of second semester, and described to me that he had left and gone back to Michigan shortly after the semester started.
Was he able to give you any more information about his roommates?
No, sir.
So you finally got him to admit he was on campus around, did he admit to it being on campus when those phone records showed him on campus on Friday at the time of the shooting?
So when I confronted him, so he initially denied being near the campus or on campus until I told him that there was scan card logs, and that those logs showed him on campus entering Crestone House at 3:40 a.m. and 5:50 or 5:40 a.m. At the time of the shooting.
So you got him to admit he was on campus. Did you ask him whether he entered pod 108?
So when I asked him to clarify where he was and what he was doing. He just described to me that he went and used the bathroom in the hallway of that building.
At any point, did he admit to entering pod 108?
No, sir, he did not.
I'm sorry, and you asked him why he was on campus, and he said what?
That he was using the bathroom.
Did he admit to living on campus still? Did he explain why he would be using the bathroom?
He told me that he was living in his car. All of his belongings had been removed from his dormitory room in room C in 108, and said that when he left campus, he had all of his belongings in his car, and that he had left the state. And then throughout conversations of asking where he was staying, he never said that he moved back into room 108 during the second semester, which started on January 16th of 2024.
Did you ask him about owning a firearm?
So I asked him if he had fired or handled a gun in Colorado Springs. Initially, he denied any actions with a firearm in Colorado Springs. As that conversation progressed about firearms, he told me he purchased a firearm while he was in Michigan.
Did he deny using the firearm anytime recent?
So he stated that he had not used the firearm, that it was in his vehicle and was somewhere in the back passenger area of his vehicle.
How did you end sort of this interview? How did it end?
So after confronting him with all of that information and with him being on campus, there was a point in which he asked me, or said that he didn't want to speak with me anymore, and at that point, the interview was concluded.
Would it be fair to say concluded with him denying knowing anything about what the crime you were investigating?
Correct.
Now I want to turn to the search of the vehicle that the defendant was in when he was arrested.
Yes, sir.
Did detectives search that vehicle?
So Detective Lee and CSIs with Colorado Springs Police Department, Metro Crime Lab, did execute a search warrant and a search of that vehicle, and Detective Lee did find 2 firearms in the vehicle.
And I want to turn your attention to People's Exhibit 13 through 18 in the packet before you.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize People's 13 through 18?
I do, yes, sir.
And I guess I'd like to include, I don't think I have People's Exhibit 12, so we'll call it 12 through 18.
Okay.
What generally is 12 through 18?
So Exhibit 12 will be a photograph of the black Ford Escape SUV that Nicholas Jordan was dragging and contacted in at the time of his arrest. And then the Exhibits 13 through 18 are items that were located during the search of Nicholas Jordan's vehicle.
Are these fair and accurate representations of the car and the items found within the car?
Yes, they are, and 19 would be included in that as well.
Hey, while you're the witness,
And sorry, and as well as 19.
Hold on, what did you just say
may I have while you're the witness, Your Honor,
about,
in regards to the evidence submission?
you may?
You indicated that it's a fair and accurate representation of the car and the bag, but you actually weren't on the scene where the car and the bag were located, correct?
No, sir, I was not.
Thank you.
I'll rephrase. To the best of your knowledge, is this a fair and accurate representation of the items recovered in the vehicle?
Yes, sir, it is.
And Your Honor, the people moved to omit People's 12 through 19 from the evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, so object on the previous objections and lack of personal foundation, lack of personal knowledge. It was ask to the best of your knowledge, but he still hasn't been able to say that this is in fact the bag in the car that it was located from. Therefore, he doesn't have a sufficient foundation for this to be right.
Mr. Vaughn?
I can lay additional foundation about other officers and how he's in charge of these other officers and reads their reports and can make the determination, John, but I do think I've laid the foundation enough for a police prelim.
I agree, the objection is overruled.
So these items in the car, I want to turn to really the most relevant part that I want to talk about, and that's essentially the firearm that's depicted in People's Exhibit number 17.
Yes, sir.
So do you know where this firearm was recovered from?
So this Taurus .40 caliber handgun was recovered from a backpack that was located in the rear passenger floor area of the black Ford Escape.
And what caliber and model is this?
It is a Taurus PT semi-automatic handgun in .40 caliber.
What does 40 caliber mean to you in relation to this case?
That is the caliber of the spent cartridge cases that were located in Samuel Knopp's bedroom, 108 number A.
Who purchased this firearm? Were you able to determine that through law enforcement records?
Yes, sir. So Nicholas Jordan did purchase this weapon from a gun store near Detroit, Michigan on January 27th, 2024.
In the timeline, less than 3 weeks prior to the killing?
Correct, 20 days, sir.
Not in Colorado, though.
Not in Colorado.
Were you able to get any additional records on the purchase of the firearm? Were those still available?
So I was provided with the purchase documents and the ATF documents associated with the purchase of the weapon. That included the handwritten information from Nicholas Jordan, to include his signature and a photograph of his Michigan ID that was presented to the gun store at the time.
And then the firearm depicted in People's Exhibit 19, what is that and where was that located?
So People's Exhibit 19 is an AK-47 rifle. And the live 7.62 by 39 caliber round that was removed from the chamber of that weapon is what is depicted with a 30-round magazine. And that weapon was located in a backpack on the front passenger floorboard of the black Ford Escape driven by Nicholas Jordan.
Understood. And I want to now turn to the ballistics performed on the Taurus .40 caliber handgun, but before I do, I had questions about the capacity of this magazine. Did you become familiar with the capacity of this magazine?
The Taurus handgun, the magazine that was in that firearm at the time it was located, has a 10-round capacity, meaning that 10 live cartridges can be loaded into that magazine, and an additional live cartridge could be placed into the chamber of the firearm, making 11 total cartridges if that weapon is fully loaded.
And why is 11 possible rounds of ammunition relevant to your investigation?
There were 11 cartridge cases collected on scene in room 108A.
When this firearm was recovered, were there any rounds found with it, inside it, in the magazine, in the chamber, anything like that?
No, sir, the magazine was empty. There was an additional magazine in the vehicle that was empty, but there was no .40 caliber ammunition located with the weapon in the backpack.
Now I want to turn to fingerprints and ballistics. Were they both performed on this firearm?
So there was a test fire conducted on the firearm.
Objection, hearsay, and this is gonna call for expert opinion. He's not gonna endorse this such.
It's my same response as everything else.
All right, this is a preliminary hearing. So the rules of evidence are relaxed and the objection is overruled. Just 1 second. Do we need to take? We need to take a break, because we're going about 2 hours. So we will be back